Hey guys, tonight we're diving nose first into the steamy, feverish, and suspiciously cough-riddled world of Victorian illness. That's right, forget the drama of ballrooms and the mysterious appeal of waistcoats. We're talking bedpans, leeches, and the glorious symphony of tubercular hacking. This is what being sick was actually like in the era of top hats, arsenic wallpaper, and doctor being a job for anyone who owned a cane, and the confidence to wave it around. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim those lights, put on a fan for that soft white noise, and get comfortable. Maybe grab a cup of herbal tea. Just make sure it's not laudanum, unless you'd like to sleep through the next 4 centuries. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you caught a cold in the 1850s? Was a doctor more likely to bleed you, feed you opium, or suggest a brisk walk in the cold-choked London fog? Did Victorians really think fainting was a symptom, a cure, or just a fun party trick? Could you survive a Victorian hospital without catching something worse than what you came in with? And was being sick just another excuse to finally wear a nightcap and ring a bell for someone to bring you broth? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the year 1861. You feel a tickle in your throat. Your nose is running. The household is already debating whether you need more brandy, fewer baths, or to simply have your humours balanced by a stranger with mutton chops. Good luck. The moment you start coughing, your world shrinks to a dimly lit bedroom smelling faintly of camphor, dust, and disappointment. The curtains are closed, the air is thick, and everyone's speaking in hushed tones as if noise might make your fever worse. Welcome to the sick room, where optimism comes to be quietly euthanized by a doily. It doesn't matter how big your house is. The sick room always feels claustrophobic. The furniture is pushed back to make room for the main event. The bed. Not the good bed, mind you, the lumpy iron-framed one that's usually reserved for unpopular cousins or the family dog. Someone's stuffed extra pillows behind your head. But they're more for propping up the illusion that you're resting comfortably than for actual comfort. Somewhere at your feet, a hot brick is cooling off inside a flannel wrap, radiating all the warmth of a forgotten potato. Around you, there's a slow ballet of family members gliding in and out, each one carrying something useless. A chipped teacup, a battered Bible, a handkerchief that has clearly already lost the war. Your mother, who is now also your nurse, is on an endless mission to adjust the bedclothes, fluff the pillows, and shush everyone, including you. Every 5 minutes she checks your forehead with the back of her hand, as if her palm has a built-in thermometer. Spoiler, it doesn't. Victorian medicine is all about atmosphere, so the windows are firmly shut, even if it's July, and someone has doused the air with a mix of vinegar, carbolic acid, and crushed lavender in a heroic but doomed attempt to fight the miasma. It mostly just makes the room smell like a salad in morning. Occasionally, someone cracks the door open for fresh air, but this is quickly closed again when your grandmother gasps, "You'll catch your death," and threatens to call for the vicar. In the corner, a washstand holds the tools of the trade. A ceramic bowl of cloudy water, a stiff flannel cloth, and a bar of soap that might be older than you are. Hygiene, in the Victorian sick room, is mostly ceremonial. There are plenty of gestures, but little actual progress. Every so often, a damp cloth is run across your face or hands, mostly to remind you what clean skin might feel like if you live to see another Tuesday. The lighting is, how shall we say it, medically depressing. Gas lamps or candles are turned down low, not out of concern for your eyes, but to maintain an air of gentle suffering. This is the Victorian aesthetic. No one wants you to be too comfortable. Even the wallpaper looks faintly ill. You spend hours staring at it, tracing the patterns with your eyes, and trying to decide if that brownish spot is a flower, a coffee stain, or a portal to another, healthier dimension. Sound is managed carefully. Nobody's allowed to laugh, and all conversations happen in a whisper. If you manage to doze off, someone immediately wakes you up to check if you're still breathing. If you're awake, you're scolded for not sleeping. The only consistent noise is the clock, ticking out the slow passage of time, occasionally interrupted by the polite but panicked clearing of someone's throat. Outside, life goes on. Carriages rumble, street vendors shout, the neighbor's dog barks incessantly. Inside, you are the center of a private little world of anxiety. Children are shooed away as if they might catch your disease by osmosis, while adults hover, wringing their hands and offering you more broth, more prayer, more layers of woolen blankets. You are, for better or worse, the main event. Visitors arrive in waves, each bringing a new round of advice, herbal teas, or just that special brand of Victorian pity. No one leaves without commenting on how brave you are, as if being too weak to sit up is a feat of heroism, and through it all, you lie back, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anyone has ever actually recovered in a room like this, or if the sick room is just a waiting room for history. If you want to see the true face of Victorian illness, don't look at the patient, look at the wallpaper. If it starts peeling away, it's either a sign of recovery or you're hallucinating again. Either way, the sick room wins. Before the doctor is even summoned, Aunt Mildred is smearing goose fat on your chest. Your cousin is waving burnt toast under your nose, and someone's heating bricks for your feet. If you survive, it's not for lack of bizarre family effort. Welcome to the greatest show in Victorian home medicine, starring an army of anxious relatives, a small herd of livestock byproducts, and the unwavering belief that the answer to any ailment is lurking somewhere in the kitchen, the garden, or the stable. It doesn't matter what's actually wrong with you, head cold, fever, broken heart, there is a home remedy for everything. And sometimes all of them are applied at once just to cover the bases. First, let's talk about chest rubs. Modern medicine may offer menthol ointment, but in your Victorian household, it's strictly animal fat or bust. The logic is simple. If it's slippery and once had a pulse, it can heal you. Goose fat, pork lard, even the occasional dab of bear grease if you're feeling extra continental. These are slathered across your chest, back, and sometimes, inexplicably, the soles of your feet. The resulting aroma lingers for days and has the secondary benefit of discouraging anyone with a functioning nose from lingering too long at your bedside. If the fat doesn't work, and it almost never does, it's time for mustard plasters. This is where science meets sadism. Someone mixes ground mustard with hot water to create a paste, then smears it on a rag and straps it to your chest or back. It's drawing out the illness. They assure you, as you writhe around trying to find a cool spot on the bed and praying for unconsciousness. If you're lucky, you'll only end up with a rash. If you're unlucky, you'll be explaining your new Victorian medical tattoo for the next 6 months. Next up is the ritual of inhalation. Got congestion? Forget decongestant spray. It's time to inhale steam infused with herbs, onion, or, if your household is especially ambitious, a teaspoon of turpentine. You sit under a heavy towel, sweating profusely, as the kitchen turns into a makeshift spa designed by people who have never seen a spa. Meanwhile, someone else is holding a hot brick wrapped in a sock near your feet, because everyone knows that heat applied to the extremities will somehow convince your lungs to behave. Let's not forget the power of burnt toast. No, you're not going to eat it. Instead, you're meant to inhale the scent, which, according to family tradition, soaks up the toxins. The burnt bits are sometimes scraped into a mug of milk and offered as a delicious beverage guaranteed to cure an upset stomach, or failing that, make you forget your other symptoms entirely. If you're running a fever, there's a heated debate, no pun intended, about whether you should sweat it out or freeze it away. Some relatives insist on piling you with blankets until you resemble a croissant. Others throw open the windows and insist you'll never get better without good, fresh air. even if that air smells heavily of coal smoke, horse, and industrial revolution. And then there's the ever-present world of teas and tonics. Every Victorian grandmother is armed with an arsenal of herbal infusions. Chamomile, peppermint, elderflower, dandelion, willow bark, and something mysterious from the garden that's just labeled special leaves. You drink it all because it's either that or offend the only person willing to fluff your pillows at midnight. If you're still conscious after all this, congratulations. Someone will come in with a raw onion to place beside your bed, absorbs bad air. A slice of potato tied to your wrist draws out fever. And, if things are really dire, a poultice of chewed bread and vinegar for your forehead. All of it is administered with the solemnity of a sacred ritual and the medical accuracy of a horoscope. And when, miraculously, you start to improve, every relative claims credit. It was the hot brick, the goose fat, the turpentine steam. Certainly not time, luck, or the fact that you survived in spite of, not because of Grandma's home remedies. You can only laugh, quietly, so as not to strain yourself. In the Victorian household, you don't get well, you get weird, and then you get stories that last for generations. The doctor bustles in, sporting an impressive hat, a bag full of questionable tools, and a vocabulary so flowery you might expire from boredom before your fever gets you. Diagnosis? Somewhere between bad air and weakness of the blood. Treatment? Buckle up. The first thing you notice, after the hat, is the coat. It's long, dark, and dusted with the kind of mysterious stains that only come from decades of carrying vials of God knows what, through rain, mud, and the occasional livestock accident. His moustache is waxed, his sideburns are intimidating, and he exudes the unshakable confidence of a man who can afford to get things wrong because he's the only one in town with a diploma, possibly framed, definitely misspelled, and proudly hung above his apothecary shelf. He begins by demanding absolute silence, as though diagnosing you requires the intense concentration of a bomb disposal expert. Your mother scurries to gather up the extra pillows. Your aunt hovers nearby holding a basin, and somewhere in the background, your cousin is already taking mental notes for next time. The doctor settles himself beside your bed, opens his black bag, and produces a series of metal instruments that look more suitable for opening a locked safe than treating a fever. He takes your pulse with a dramatic flourish, frowning as if he's reading the final act of a tragic play. Ah yes, the pulse is thready, he intones, nodding with grave satisfaction. Next, he asks you to stick out your tongue. He examines it for several minutes, occasionally shaking his head with a gravity that implies he's just seen tomorrow's obituary. He might even tap your chest a few times, producing a sound that could mean pneumonia, impending doom, or that lunch is nearly ready. Victorian medicine loves nothing more than a good theory, and this doctor has them all. He might blame your condition on a recent east wind, excessive reading by candlelight, or your scandalous habit of not wearing a scarf indoors. He could declare your humours are unbalanced, your spleen is sluggish, or, worst of all, that your constitution is simply nervous. This is not a compliment. Then comes the questioning, an interrogation worthy of a criminal trial. Have you experienced chills, night sweats, melancholy? Have you eaten too many turnips? He records your answers in a tiny notebook, scribbling furiously, pausing only to tap his chin and mutter, "Interesting, interesting." If you're unlucky, he'll turn his attention to the rest of the household, quizzing them about your sleep habits, appetite, and moral fiber. If you're lucky, he'll forget and move on to your diagnosis. At last, he straightens his waistcoat, clears his throat, and launches into a lengthy speech about the dangers of miasmas and the value of moderate exercise, even for the nearly unconscious. The prescription is usually vague, but somehow exhausting. Take a brisk walk in the garden, avoid damp weather, abstain from cheese, consume a hot beef tea, and under no circumstances allow yourself to be exposed to excitement or French novels. Of course, there are always remedies. Out come the bottles, brown glass, blue glass, clear glass, none of which are labeled in a way that inspires confidence. He measures out a generous dose of something that smells suspiciously like paint thinner and hands it over with the same gravitas as a priest offering last rites. "Take this every hour," he commands, "unless you feel worse, in which case, take it every half hour." No one questions the logic. Sometimes there's bloodletting, just to keep you humble. If not, expect a purgative, a tonic, or a nice warm mustard plaster, ideally all three in quick succession. The doctor's treatments seem designed to keep you busy enough to forget you're sick. He finally gathers his things, delivers a speech on the importance of good morals and sturdy undergarments, and promises to return if the east wind holds. The household breathes a sigh of relief. You, on the other hand, are left with a faint sense of doom and a mouth that tastes like turpentine. If you're lucky, you'll survive both the illness and the treatment. If not, at least you got a full performance. In Victorian England, the doctor's greatest skill is never admitting uncertainty. After all, the real prescription was always confidence. Served with a flourish and just a dash of laudanum, out comes a dazzling array of brass syringes, wooden tongue depressors, saws and forceps, most of which have never met soap. It's part medical care, part Victorian cosplay, all terrifying. The doctor's bag itself is the stuff of nightmares, both bottomless and mysterious. He sets it down on the bedside table with the reverence of a man revealing ancient treasure, or perhaps just hoping no one notices the suspicious stains on the leather. The latches snap open with a sound that says, "This won't be pleasant," and soon the instruments emerge one by one, catching the candlelight in ways that make you wish you'd never gotten out of bed. Let's start with the tongue depressor. A thick wooden stick, the kind that looks more at home stirring porridge than inspecting throats. He asks you to say "ah," then proceeds to inspect your tonsils as though he's searching for buried treasure or perhaps a lost will. If the tongue depressor breaks, he has plenty more, probably whittled during long, lonely evenings, possibly using wood salvaged from questionable sources. Splinters are just an added feature. Then there's the stethoscope, an impressive single tube of wood pressed firmly against your chest with all the subtlety of a judge's gavel. He'll listen for a while, brow furrowed, and nod as if he's detecting a symphony of inner secrets. To you, it feels more like being investigated for concealed contraband. "Aha," he'll mutter, the lungs are singing their usual tune. No one's quite sure what that means, but everyone nods solemnly. But the real stars of the Victorian medical show are the syringes. Big, brassy things that look like they were designed by a blacksmith with performance anxiety. No one is entirely confident whether these are for injecting, extracting, or just for intimidating anyone who asks too many questions. The needles are enormous, occasionally curved, and sterilized with a quick swipe on the doctor's lapel. If you flinch, you're told to be brave, which in this context means hold still and pray. Next, the forceps, long, cold metal pincers that could double as tongs for the family fireplace. These are used for everything from pulling teeth to retrieving foreign objects. And, in a pinch, for making your nightmares much more vivid. If you're lucky, the forceps only make a brief appearance. If you're unlucky, you'll become intimately familiar with every groove and scratch on their surface. Of course, there's also the amputation saw. It might not be used tonight, one can hope, but it's always present, lurking at the bottom of the bag, just in case things progress. The saw is heavy, worn, and emits the faint whiff of past regrets. Sometimes it's shown to the patient as a warning, like a parent brandishing a wooden spoon. Behave, or we might need this. Don't forget the cupping glasses, thick glass domes designed to draw the bad humors out of your body via a combination of heat, suction, and wishful thinking. The doctor heats the glass, presses it to your skin, and stands back to admire the angry red marks, as if he's making a contemporary art piece titled Despair in Scarlet. There are also mysterious powders, small vials of colored liquid, and an alarming number of rusty-looking scalpels. Some of these instruments are explained, others are simply waved about as if their mere presence is curative. Most are multi-purpose, which is code for we're about to experiment. Sanitation is, at best, theoretical. The closest anything gets to being cleaned is a quick wipe on the doctor's coat or a rinse in a basin of lukewarm water shared by everyone from the cat to the local blacksmith. If you're lucky, you only catch what you already have, and so the examination proceeds. Equal parts drama, guesswork, and terrifying show and tell. By the end, you're left with the vague sense that you've survived a small battle, a magic trick, and a particularly odd episode of Antiques Roadshow. In Victorian medicine, the tools are sharp, the methods are questionable, and the odds of recovery? Well, they mostly depend on your willingness to be poked, prodded, and slightly traumatized for the sake of science, or whatever passed for it at the time. Nothing says rest and recover like having several ounces of your blood removed by a man who smells of gin. If that fails, bring on the leeches. It's slimy, slow, and somehow still preferable to the next option, mercury. Welcome to the golden age of drain first. Ask questions later. Victorians inherited a centuries-old belief in the four humours, which meant every ailment, headache, fever, existential dread, could be cured by getting rid of some of the offending fluids inside you. Have too much blood? Out it goes. Too much phlegm? Well, they can probably get that out too. But it's less dramatic. Bloodletting was the star of the show, performed with cheerful confidence and a complete disregard for modern ideas like blood pressure or survival rates. It starts with the arrival of the family doctor, who rolls up his sleeves and produces his favorite lancet, a small, wickedly sharp blade that gleams in the candlelight and looks suspiciously like it was borrowed from the kitchen drawer. This won't hurt a bit, he promises, which is Victorian for prepare to see your own life flash before your eyes. He selects a vein at random, usually in your arm, but occasionally in more creative locations, and makes a neat incision. A porcelain bowl waits below to collect the vital essence. Like some grim punch bowl at a haunted picnic. There is absolutely no attempt to sterilize anything, but on the bright side, there's usually a fresh linen napkin on hand to mop your brow and, if needed, stuff into your mouth to keep you from swearing in front of the children. Sometimes, if you're special, they'll keep a record of how many ounces were removed. Spoiler, it's always too many. If, by some miracle, bloodletting fails to produce a miraculous recovery, meaning you're still sick, but now paler and significantly dizzier, it's time for leeches. Picture this: a jar of squirming, aquatic nightmares, which the doctor handles with the loving care of a man introducing his pets to a new home. Leeches are applied to your skin, anywhere from the temples to your inner thighs, and left to do what nature intended: drink your blood and make you deeply regret the invention of medicine. There is a whole ritual to leeching. The family gathers around to watch, because nothing says bonding time like cheering on a leech as it swells to the size of a small sausage. Occasionally, someone offers encouragement, as if the leech is running a marathon. The doctor assures you this is a gentle treatment, unless the leech gets lost, in which case everyone panics and you get a new phobia for free. When the leech has had enough, it's gently plucked off and placed back in the jar, ready to traumatize the next victim. Bonus points if you're still bleeding an hour later. Continued drainage is seen as a good sign, not a cause for alarm. Now, if you're really unlucky, or just not getting better fast enough, the Victorian medical arsenal has one last ace up its sleeve: mercury. Sometimes in pill form, sometimes as an ointment, sometimes as a gas if you're feeling particularly adventurous. Mercury was believed to purge the body of illness, which it did by purging you of, well, being alive and having teeth. Side effects included salivation, tremors, tooth loss, and the creeping suspicion that your doctor might be guessing. Through it all, the logic remains impeccable. You can't be sick if you're empty. If you're still conscious after losing half your blood volume and surviving a leech family reunion, congratulations, you're officially on the mend. If not, the best you can hope for is a rousing eulogy and the knowledge that your fluids died for science. So the next time you're tempted to complain about modern medicine, remember, at least your doctor's toolkit doesn't look like a tackle box, and the only leeches you deal with are metaphorical. In the Victorian era, fluids were always suspect, and the solution was always to let them out, one way or another. Victorian medicine cabinets were less about cure and more about vague euphoria. Laudanum, opium, brandy, basically. If you weren't sleeping, you were hallucinating. No wonder everyone looked so haunted in those old photographs. Picture yourself, propped up in bed, surrounded by well-meaning relatives, and the thick, perfumed haze of a dozen herbal concoctions. In walks your mother with a brown glass bottle and the serene confidence of someone who's never read a warning label in her life. She pours a generous spoonful of laudanum, a solution of opium and alcohol, so potent it could make a grown man forget he ever owned a spleen. She assures you it's doctor-approved, as if the doctor is less a scientist and more a traveling illusionist. Swallowing laudanum is a rite of passage. It tastes like regret mixed with molasses. After a few minutes, the pain fades, your eyelids droop, and suddenly the lace on your pillowcase is reciting poetry. The upside: you can finally sleep through the cacophony of relatives debating whether you need another mustard plaster or a second opinion. The downside: you may not remember your own name, or what year it is, or why everyone around you is moving in slow motion. Your fever dreams become a wild carousel of pink elephants, Victorian wallpaper, and your Aunt Mildred's hat. But why stop at laudanum? The Victorian cure-all catalogue offers something for everyone. Got a cough? Try opium lozenges, as soothing as they are suspicious. Got a headache? Try a little more laudanum. One dose for pain, another for general malaise, and a third to take the edge off all the laudanum. Child won't stop crying? No problem. Paregoric syrup, opium for babies. No, really. Infants all across the empire are sleeping soundly, dreaming of the day when they too can be prescribed something stronger than whiskey. And speaking of whiskey, don't overlook the mighty medicinal brandy. Whether you have a toothache, a stomachache, or an existential ache, the answer is always a thimbleful of the good stuff. It's not just a beverage, it's a solution. Brandy is poured into tea, mixed into soup, or sipped directly from a decorative decanter kept on the nightstand for emergencies. If you're too ill to swallow, someone might even soak a cloth in brandy and dab it on your lips, which is Victorian, for at least your mouth will be numb while you fade into the next dimension. No one seems worried about dosage. In fact, the recommended dose is usually until the patient is quiet, which is medical code for as much as it takes. This approach, while risky, does explain why half the population looks simultaneously exhausted and deeply, mysteriously content. Opium and alcohol, together at last, in a partnership more powerful than any modern pharmaceutical. Side effects? Naturally, some people become deeply philosophical, others become emotional, and a few start seeing the family wallpaper as a sentient being. There are moments of profound poetry, followed by hours of drooling into a handkerchief. No one is immune. Even the local vicar has a secret bottle of tonic tucked away for moments of spiritual distress. Eventually the haze lifts, maybe after a day, maybe after 3. You emerge groggy, mildly confused, and just a little suspicious of the furniture. The original illness is often gone, or at least has given up competing with the side effects. The household breathes a sigh of relief. Someone brings you weak tea. Someone else mops your brow, and you wonder vaguely if you'll ever feel feelings again. So if you're ever tempted to romanticize the Victorian sick room, remember, the real miracle wasn't recovery. It was that anyone remembered to wake up. In a world before warnings, restrictions, or common sense, being sick was less about getting better and more about drifting gently into a chemically induced nap and hoping your relatives kept the laudanum under lock and key. According to cutting-edge science, disease floated in through your window, riding dirty breezes straight from the Thames. The solution? Burn more incense. Open fewer windows. Or both, depending on the weather and which uncle you ask. Welcome to the Victorian era's favourite medical scapegoat, the miasma. If you're feeling unwell, it's not the questionable oyster you ate at dinner or the rat family nesting behind the wainscoting. No, it's bad air, an invisible, sinister fog, thick with the collective regrets of an unwashed city. Your only hope of surviving the season's latest ague is to barricade yourself indoors, light enough lavender candles to make your home a fire hazard, and pray the breeze changes direction before your neighbour's privy is emptied again. Miasma theory is both marvellously simple and endlessly flexible. Too hot in the sick room? Don't open the window, you'll let in the death air. Too cold? Better shut it, or you'll catch your death. Air smells fresh and clean? Be careful, that's how the miasma sneaks up on you. The result? Houses with the ventilation of a root cellar, filled with family members debating whether it's better to suffocate quietly or risk death by drafts. If the air outside is suspect, the air inside is special. In the absence of Lysol, or even basic soap, Victorians employ every aromatic remedy they can find. Camphor balls hang from the ceiling, bowls of vinegar sit on every surface, and every available vase is stuffed with posies, dried lavender, or, when desperation peaks, raw onions. Each new bouquet is announced with the solemnity of a ritual, and you soon learn to recognize the sick room smell, a heady blend of hope, herbs, and a deep-seated fear of invisible particles. Sometimes, things escalate. Your aunt stalks from room to room waving a stick of incense like an exorcist at a poltergeist convention. Your mother sprinkles carbolic acid along the windowsills, convinced that sharp odors can fight sharp fevers. The local apothecary sells scented pomanders, small balls of wax and spice to wear around your neck like a talisman against the unwashed masses and their airborne intentions. If you're especially unlucky, you'll be handed a vinegar-soaked handkerchief just in case, and encouraged to wave it around your face every time someone coughs within a 3-house radius. And yet, the city outside remains a living experiment in public health hazards. Streets are paved with horse manure, refuse, and whatever creative waste the Victorians haven't invented a euphemism for yet. Fog rolls in from the river, thick with the perfume of 10,000 unemptied chamber pots, and everyone agrees, you can smell the fever coming. This is not a metaphor. Doctors debate the cause of every epidemic like philosophers in a badly ventilated cafe. Is it the putrid vapors wafting from the riverbanks? The noxious fumes rising from the cemetery? Or perhaps just unwholesome emanations from next door's laundry day? Actual germs won't be discovered for decades. So for now, everyone is content to treat the air as both the enemy and a cure, depending on whether it's payday. Meanwhile, quack inventors seize the moment. Enterprising Victorians market ozone machines for the home, clockwork contraptions designed to purify your parlour by wafting even more mysterious vapours into the mix. Some recommend filling the sick room with smoke from burning herbs, tobacco, or even tar. There is, in short, a lot of smoking, waving, and wafting, and very little actual cleaning. If all else fails, blame the weather. Died of the flu? It was the east wind. Got a rash? Must have caught a chill after sunset. Even the family dog is suspect, especially if he's prone to sleeping near open windows. At the end of the day, you're left with the comfort of ritual, a home that smells like an abandoned apothecary, and a window you're still not allowed to open. So, as you drift off under 6 layers of woolen blankets and a medicinal bouquet, remember, in the Victorian world, every draught was deadly, every breeze a gamble, and every illness just a whiff of the wrong air away. Sweet dreams. And don't forget to close the window. Half the house insists bathing will help draw out the fever. The other half is sure that getting wet will send you to an early grave. The only thing everyone agrees on? You definitely smell worse than before. Welcome to the Victorian bathroom, also known as where arguments go to soak. On one side, the enthusiastic bathers, brandishing buckets of lukewarm water and quoting the latest health pamphlet. On the other, the cautious skeptics, convinced a single dip will let death in through your pores, your soul, or both. At the center, you, sweaty, shivering, and growing increasingly nostalgic for the simpler days of just being covered in mud. If you're unlucky enough to be the patient, the bathing debate is not theoretical, it's scheduled. There's always a fierce aunt with a wooden spoon insisting a hot bath will sweat out the bad humors. She'll point to the latest advice from a very respected doctor in London, who probably hasn't bathed in months himself. According to her, the hotter and steamier, the better. So a kettle is fetched, towels are heated on the fire, and the kitchen is transformed into a sauna run by people who have never seen an actual bathhouse. But the opposition is equally fierce. Some family members hover outside the door, wringing their hands and shouting dire warnings about sinking chills and inviting consumption. Bathing, they insist, weakens the blood, makes the lungs lazy, and generally spells disaster for the constitution. The only thing worse than catching a cold, in their view, is trying to wash one away. The equipment itself doesn't help anyone's nerves. Bathing, Victorian style, is a full-contact sport involving a tin tub hauled from storage, several buckets of water in varying temperatures, and a bar of soap that could double as a doorstop. If you're rich, you might have a bathroom, but odds are you're still doing this in front of the kitchen stove, shielded only by a threadbare curtain and a deep sense of denial. The water, of course, is questionable. Fresh from the well, your uncle brags, ignoring the suspicious flecks floating on the surface. Most people just hope it was boiled long enough to kill whatever is currently swimming laps. The more superstitious relatives sprinkle in lavender, vinegar, or even a dash of brandy for the nerves. And you, perched nervously on a rickety stool, wonder if you'll survive long enough to tell future generations about your near drowning by family committee. Once the bath starts, the room fills with enough steam to fog up the family portraits. Your mother hovers, worried you'll faint. Your grandmother hovers, worried you'll get ideas about bathing every week. Someone debates whether scrubbing your back with a rough cloth counts as a cure or a medieval punishment. If you're really sick, you might be treated to the sponge bath, a ritual in which water is dabbed gently onto your limbs as though you are made of parchment and could dissolve at any second. This, at least, avoids the risk of total immersion, a fate reserved for only the bravest or dirtiest. If you emerge from the ordeal alive, you are quickly wrapped in so many towels and blankets that you resemble a Victorian caterpillar, and then hustled back to bed for recovery, also known as drying out and hoping no one notices you're still feverish. Meanwhile, everyone immediately resumes arguing about whether the ordeal helped or nearly killed you. Did your color improve? Is your cough better? Or is that just the sound of water in your lungs? No one knows, and the next person to fall ill is bound to get the opposite advice, because nothing in the Victorian home is ever settled for long. The only certainty is this: whether you bathe or not, everyone will talk about it for weeks. You'll be remembered as the one who survived the bath, or the poor soul who took to water and never quite recovered. In the end, the debate will rage on, and you'll go to bed cleaner, but just as confused, wondering if maybe dirt was a better shield all along. Because in the Victorian era, water could heal, or it could kill, or it could just make family dinner more awkward. Either way, next time you take a shower, be grateful you don't need to hold a committee meeting first. Unless you're spectacularly rich, your nurse is a sleep-deprived relative who just learned how to mop a brow and occasionally confuse poison with pudding. If you're extra lucky, she's also good at ignoring screams. Your nurse isn't wearing a crisp white uniform or walking with the serene confidence of a lantern-carrying saint. No, she's wearing yesterday's apron. a frayed shawl, and an expression that suggests she hasn't slept since last Michaelmas. Her hands smell faintly of onions, and her idea of bedside manner is don't bleed on the rug. She's your aunt, your mother, maybe the neighbor's eldest daughter, the nearest warm body with a pulse and a basic ability to stir porridge without burning the house down. If you were hoping for professionalism, adjust your expectations. Nursing, for the average Victorian family, is an act of grim determination mixed with guesswork and the occasional exorcism. There's a lot of mopping brows with damp cloths, tucking blankets with the subtlety of a competitive burrito roller, and shushing any hint of discomfort with a firm nonsense. You're just a bit tired. Bedpans are managed with the same delicacy as unexploded munitions. And spilled broth is cleaned up only if someone slips on it. The nurse's toolkit is formidable, if not exactly sterile. It contains at least 3 handkerchiefs, all damp, a spoon for medicines, mostly sherry and laudanum, and a damp sponge of uncertain provenance. Bandages are old linen torn from a forgotten nightgown. If you need your temperature checked, it's with the back of her hand or, if you're lucky, a thermometer that's mostly used for stirring tea. Nighttime is when things really get exciting. Sleep is for the weak, or at least for those who aren't currently on nurse duty. Your nurse sits in a creaky wooden chair by your bed, dozing with one eye open and the other on the clock. Every cough is met with a startled jump, every sigh with a fresh round of, "Are you cold? Are you hot? Are you breathing?" If you need something in the middle of the night, she's up and across the room before you can blink, often tripping over the family cat or stepping in a strategically placed chamber pot. Mistakes are inevitable. It's not her fault. The cough syrup and the cleaning vinegar look identical in low candlelight. The line between soothing tonic and random tincture from the pantry is paper thin, and more than one invalid has woken up to find their lips inexplicably blue. If you protest, she'll assure you that it's all for the best and the doctor recommended it. Even if the doctor's only advice was, keep them quiet and away from the good furniture. Discretion is another hallmark of the Victorian nurse. She will ignore anything that can be politely ignored. Your embarrassing rash? She'll draw the curtains and hum loudly. Night terrors? She'll pat your hand and assure you it's probably the result of eating cheese after dusk. Even your most feverish hallucinations are treated as unremarkable, unless they threaten to involve the vicar or the neighbours, in which case you'll be shushed and redirected with firm, matronly authority. But through all this, she's unwaveringly present. When you're at your worst, delirious and muttering to invisible ghosts, she's there with cool water and a muttered prayer. When you finally sleep, she tiptoes out, only to be back before dawn with a cup of weak tea and a spoonful of hope. Her medical expertise may be lacking, but her stubbornness is legendary. So no, Florence Nightingale isn't coming. But neither is she needed. The true Victorian nurse is the unsung hero of the sick room, improvising, multitasking, and quietly holding the household together with equal parts guilt, love, and whatever was in that bottle on the top shelf. In the end, you might recover because of her, or in spite of her. But you'll never forget her. All nutrition is reduced to 3 beige foods: thin gruel, even thinner broth, and the occasional gelatinous mystery. You start to wonder if Victorian recovery was just a polite way of saying lose 10 pounds in 3 days. Welcome to the bland banquet of the invalid, where every meal is both a culinary punishment and a medical experiment. You haven't really known despair until you've watched your breakfast slowly slide around the bowl, clinging to hope and the sides in equal measure. If it jiggles, sloshes, or can be poured from one vessel to another without changing shape, it's on the menu. Let's begin with the gruel. The word itself conjures images of sad, Dickensian orphans, but you're about to discover it's not just for plot development. It's the sick room staple. Gruel is made by simmering oats, rice, or some unidentified grain in a vast lake of water until it's the texture of regret. Sometimes, for variety, they'll toss in a pinch of salt. Or, if you're lucky, a ghost of milk. It's not so much eaten as endured. If you close your eyes and concentrate, you might convince yourself it's soup. You will fail. Next up is broth, which is gruel's equally uninspiring cousin. If you've ever tasted hot water left too long in a pan with a chicken bone for company, you know the flavor profile. A proper Victorian broth must be clear enough to see the bottom of the bowl, light enough to float a feather, and contain at most one molecule of actual nutrition per serving. Carrots and onions are occasionally cited, bobbing like survivors of a shipwreck, but mostly it's just you, your spoon, and your thoughts. On rare, festive occasions, the kitchen will attempt jellied beef tea. This is exactly what it sounds like. Beef stock that has cooled into a wobbly mass, sliced and served with a straight face. Victorian wisdom held that jelly was easier on the digestion, but the only thing it reliably settled was your hope for flavor. If you ever wondered what it's like to chew on a meat-flavored marshmallow, this is your chance. Spoiler, it's not fun. If you're truly ill, your meals become even less substantial. There's a whole subgenre of invalid puddings, arrowroot, sago, and tapioca, all famous for their ability to confuse the tongue and slide sadly off the spoon. Occasionally, someone will attempt a posset, a mixture of hot milk and wine, which manages to be both a drink and a dessert, but mostly just a new way to make you dread mealtimes. And let's not forget the social aspect. Each bowl of slop is brought in by a well-meaning relative who watches you with desperate hope, as if your recovery depends on your ability to finish 2 tablespoons of translucent horror. "Eat up, it'll give you strength," they chirp, unaware that what you need is a burger and a time machine. Refusing food is seen as a personal insult, not to the cook, but to the entire family's commitment to Victorian values. When your great-uncle had the influenza, he finished his gruel and thanked us. Someone will remind you, conveniently omitting the part where he also swore off oatmeal forever. Meanwhile, medical books of the era offered strict dietary advice. Nothing too spicy, nothing too rich, and nothing remotely interesting. Most illnesses, it seems, could be managed by depriving your taste buds of stimulation. By day 3, you'll fantasize about flavor. Salt becomes a dream. Pepper is a rumor. Bacon is the stuff of fevered hallucination. By the time you're declared on the mend, you're half the person you were. Lighter, paler, and forever suspicious of anything beige. But congratulations, you've survived Victorian nutrition, a process designed less for healing and more for lowering your expectations about every meal that follows. Because if you could live through gruel, you can handle anything, even hospital pudding. You're whisked off to a hospital, where the walls drip with optimism and actual fluids. Surgery is performed with more bravery than anesthesia, and your odds of leaving with all your limbs are slim. From the moment you arrive, it's clear that Victorian hospitals are less a sanctuary of healing and more a live-action experiment in how many people you can cram into a single, echoing hall without anyone starting a fire. The building itself is imposing, a grand stone edifice that looks like it could withstand a siege, but struggles against a strong breeze and basic sanitation. Inside, you're greeted by the scent of carbolic acid, boiled cabbage, and something less identifiable, but probably contagious. The first stop is the admissions desk, where a clerk with impressive sideburns copies your name into a ledger that will later double as a patient obituary. "A bed, if you please," you say. "We'll see what's left," they reply, scanning a room crowded with more cots than floorboards. Privacy isn't even a rumor here. You'll share your space with strangers, some coughing, some moaning, a few possibly dead but still occupying a spot. Curtains? Not unless you count the faint haze of steam and despair. Your nurse, if you're lucky enough to be assigned one, leads you past the men's ward, the women's ward, and the unfortunate cases ward, which is as mysterious as it is ominous. Beds are lined up in neat rows, interrupted only by buckets, spittoons, and the occasional scurrying rat. You're reminded to keep your shoes on, lest your feet become the latest vector for the local plague of the week. Then there's the staff. Doctors in somber coats, nurses in aprons, and a rotating cast of medical students eager to practice their craft on something less mobile than a squirrel. They whisper in Latin, frown at your chart, and occasionally prod you with cold fingers before moving on to their next victim. The more senior the doctor, the bigger the hat, and the less time he spends washing his hands. Hygiene, if it exists at all, is more theoretical than practical. Surgical tools are wiped on a handy apron, and the same saw that just removed a gangrenous leg may be heading your way for a minor procedure. If someone does bother to clean an instrument, it's usually by dipping it in a bowl of tepid water, swirling it for dramatic effect, and then immediately returning it to active duty. The only thing truly sterile is the sense of impending doom. If you require surgery, prepare for an audience. Operations are public events, with medical students, curious onlookers, and possibly the janitor crowded into a cramped operating theatre to witness the spectacle. Anesthesia is still a novelty. Sometimes you get chloroform, sometimes a stiff drink, sometimes just something to bite down on. The surgeon works quickly. The goal is speed, not elegance. After all, the longer you're open, the longer everyone has to consider the wisdom of your life choices. And what about recovery? Post-operative care involves little more than a prayer, a slap on the back, and the vague hope that you'll be less infectious by morning. Wounds are packed with lint, bandages are reused, and infection is considered just one of those things, like weather or taxes, that everyone must endure. If you survive the first 3 days, you're considered out of danger, which is Victorian for unlikely to sue. Meanwhile, the hospital is a symphony of sounds, coughs, groans, the clatter of chamber pots, and the distant cries of a nurse berating a student for improper leech placement. Night brings no relief. The gaslights flicker, shadows loom, and you find yourself pondering escape routes. Yet, somehow, some patients do recover. They walk out missing a toe or two, but alive, with stories that will horrify future generations. So next time you grumble about a hospital gown or bland jello, remember, Victorian hospitals were the original reality show. Except no one wanted to get picked for the next episode. Surgery isn't private, it's a spectator sport. Students, neighbors, and that one guy who just likes blood all gather around to see what comes out of you next. Hygiene is for future generations. Picture it. You're lying on a hard wooden table that's seen more action than a saloon floor, staring up at a ceiling blackened by years of gas lamps and anxious exhalations. Around you, a semicircle of eager faces leans in, the smell of hair, oil, and anticipation thick in the air. You thought surgery would be about you and your doctor, maybe a concerned relative clutching your hand. Instead, it's about to become the highlight of someone's afternoon. No pressure. In the Victorian era, surgical theatres are just that, literal theatres. Tired benches rise up from the operating table, packed with medical students, local dignitaries, and the occasional person who just wandered in, hoping for some live entertainment. The surgeon takes center stage. Sleeves rolled up, hands moving with the dramatic flourish of a concert pianist. He may tip his hat, say a few words, and then gesture to the crowd as if he's about to saw a lady in half, and in some ways, he is. Don't expect sedation beyond a slug of brandy, a sniff of ether, or, if you're unlucky, nothing at all. The anesthetic revolution is only just beginning, and supplies run out quickly, especially if the students get there first. The goal of every operation is speed. The faster the cut, the better your chances of surviving both blood loss and public embarrassment. Some surgeons become local celebrities for their ability to amputate a leg in under 3 minutes. A dubious honor that occasionally results in the wrong limb being removed, but always guarantees applause. Hygiene, as mentioned, is a future fad. The operating table is wiped down with a rag, and the surgeon's apron serves as a scrapbook of past successes and failures. Instruments are displayed on a tray for all to admire. But no one seems bothered that yesterday's bone saw is today's scalpel. If you're really unlucky, you'll be operated on after someone with a particularly nasty infection. Cross-contamination is just another word for good luck. As the operation begins, the crowd leans in. Students furiously scribble notes. Some faint, and at least one always makes a bet about how much you'll bleed. The doctor narrates his every move for educational purposes, describing your anatomy in vivid detail while you stare at the ceiling and contemplate your life choices. Note the robust femoral artery, he'll announce, and you'll wonder if robust is good or just a warning to bring extra towels. There's no such thing as privacy. If you scream, someone will comment on your excellent lung capacity. If you pass out, applause erupts for successful management of patient distress. Afterwards, the crowd disperses, chatting about the highlights while you're bundled off to the recovery ward, slightly lighter and, with luck, still in possession of most of your original parts. But even after the main event, the fun isn't over. Your surgery will be dissected in every sense. Students will debate what went right, what went wrong, and who fainted first. You become a case study, a story, an answer to a question on someone's final exam. There's a certain grim immortality in knowing that your misfortune has furthered the cause of medical education, at least. That's what they tell you as they hand you a cup of watered-down brandy and hope you don't notice the bandages are recycled. So next time you cringe at the thought of a crowded waiting room, remember, in Victorian times, surgery was not just healing, it was theatre, and you were the unwilling star. If you survived, you didn't just get better, you got reviewed. 4 out of 5 medical students recommend. Don't try this at home. Your brain takes you on a magical journey through fields of talking radishes, while your body shivers under 6 woolen blankets. Someone tries to fan the evil humors away. You remain unconvinced. Welcome to the main event of Victorian illness, the fever dream, a one-person circus where logic takes the night off and your subconscious runs wild. The show starts as soon as your temperature rises above, uncomfortably sweaty and into medically alarming. You try to sleep, but your bed has become a pulsing swamp of damp sheets, scratchy wool, and a hot water bottle that alternates between scalding and glacial. Every shadow in the room stretches and wiggles. The wallpaper begins to move in a way that would concern even the most open-minded interior designer. As the fever spikes, time loses meaning. 1 minute you're staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks for comfort. The next, you're wandering a labyrinth made of teacups and disappointed relatives. You hallucinate entire conversations with the family cat, who gives surprisingly harsh medical advice. In the real world, your nurse mops your brow with a vinegar-soaked rag, convinced it will draw out the bad spirits. In your mind, she's a friendly giantess wielding a mop made of eels. The line between nightmare and reality is blurred by a haze of laudanum and the general chaos of Victorian sickroom lighting. Occasionally, you wake to find a new crowd at your bedside. They're watching with anxious eyes, whispering about your color, your breathing, and whether you just muttered something in Latin. Someone suggests more blankets. Someone else, in a burst of radical innovation, proposes removing one. You're too busy exploring the River Thames on a bar of soap to contribute meaningfully to the debate. Victorian medicine, for all its enthusiasm, has few answers when it comes to fever hallucinations. The official advice is to let nature take its course, which mostly involves sweating, muttering, and alarming the household. Medical guides recommend sponging with tepid water and reading aloud from the Psalms, which, in your delirium, only encourages the talking vegetables to form a choir. Night is the worst. Every hour stretches out like a bad sermon. The house is quiet except for your own tossing, the occasional distant clatter of chamber pots, and the ever-present ticking of the grandfather clock. Sometimes, your fevered mind decides it's morning and insists you must get up for work. Despite having no memory of what job you're supposed to do, you attempt to stand and immediately sink back, foiled by weakness, blankets, and the gentle but firm hand of a nurse who's seen it all before. Then come the dreams within dreams. You recover, rise heroically from your sickbed, and stride confidently into the parlor, only to realize you're actually just tangled in bed linens, halfway through a passionate debate with your pillow about the merits of lemon posset. The only witness is the family dog, who looks more judgmental than usual. If you're very unlucky, your fever hallucinations get written down by a helpful relative for posterity. Years later, someone will quote back your midnight monologue about the invisible cheesemongers as proof of your lifelong eccentricity. If you're lucky, your worst outbursts will be blamed on the bad air, last week's mutton, or simply Victorian nerves. Eventually, the fever breaks. You wake up drenched in sweat, sheets in disarray, with only the vaguest memory of your adventures through the realms of nonsense. Your family greets you like a returning hero. You made it, they cheer, serving up cold broth and even colder comfort. In the Victorian era, fever dreams are an expected part of being truly, properly ill. They're proof that you've suffered, that your imagination works overtime, and that even in misery, you can at least entertain the household. So rest easy, and if you meet any talking radishes tonight, be polite. They might just have the secret to recovery. A little cough? Better start planning your legacy. Tuberculosis isn't just an illness, it's a lifestyle. Expect years of dramatic handkerchief use and the possibility of a very fashionable early death. In the Victorian era, tuberculosis, also known as consumption or the Romantics disease, was everywhere. It crept through drawing rooms, workhouses, and tenements with the casual confidence of a guest who knows they won't be asked to leave. In a world where nobody quite understood germs, TB was a master of disguise, slipping from one body to the next, coughing politely into lace-embroidered linens, and leaving only pale, poetic sufferers in its wake. If you're unlucky enough to develop that telltale hack, the household's first response is not panic, but gentle resignation and a flurry of preparations. The good handkerchiefs come out, delicate, monogrammed, and destined for regular laundering. You're moved to a sunny room, if one can be found, and everyone starts practicing the delicate art of expressing sympathy without getting too close. Your mother worries about the draft. Your father quietly sharpens his will, writing quill. Tuberculosis, for all its horrors, was the trendiest of illnesses. Victorians admired the consumptive look, pale skin, sunken cheeks, and a distant, thoughtful gaze, as if you'd spent the afternoon contemplating tragedy by moonlight. Artists, poets, and especially tragic heroines seemed to catch it regularly. If you wanted to look mysterious and ethereal, all you needed was a persistent cough and a tendency to stare wistfully out the window, possibly while composing epic poetry, or just wondering what it felt like to breathe properly. But behind the poetic branding, the reality is far less romantic. Your days begin with fits of coughing so fierce they rattle the chamber pots and send relatives running for another bowl of beef tea. You're advised to get plenty of fresh air, so you're bundled onto the porch, no matter the weather, where you shiver under blankets and watch your breath fog the chilly morning. Everyone discusses your constitution in worried tones, as if you're a delicate carriage with a cracked axle. The treatments for tuberculosis are as varied as they are useless. You'll be prescribed cod liver oil, builds strength, daily eggnog, for fortification, and a parade of tonics, syrups, and pills with labels more optimistic than effective. If your family has the means, you might be sent to the seaside, a mountain retreat, or a sanatorium, a sort of health resort where patients lounge around in deck chairs and compete to see whose cough sounds most artistic. Of course, the risk of contagion is handled with the subtlety of a Victorian scandal. Cups and spoons are boiled. Visitors are gently discouraged, unless they're especially dramatic or bring gifts. Children are warned to mind the consumptive, and family pets suddenly find themselves exiled from your bed. Some people believe the disease is spread by bad air, others by moral weakness. But nobody really blames the long hours spent in smoky parlors or the fact that half the household hasn't seen sunlight since last year's frost fair. As your illness lingers, you become a household fixture, a source of concern, inspiration, and endless speculation. Will you recover and stun everyone with a miraculous return to health? Or are you destined for an early grave and a commemorative poem in the local paper? Either way, your days are measured in teaspoons, handkerchiefs, and sighs. And yet, through all this, there's a strange sense of dignity. Victorians loved a good tragedy, and consumption offered all the right notes: noble suffering, visible decline, and the ever-present chance to make a dramatic exit. It was the original slow burn series finale, complete with tearful monologues and tasteful decor. So if you find yourself coughing in a Victorian sick room, don't just worry. Embrace the drama. Wave your handkerchief with flair, gaze out the window, and know that, at least for now, you're the star of the world's most genteel horror story. And if you make it through, congratulations. You've survived both the disease and the performance. Some illnesses skip the drama and head straight for chaos. You're running to the privy every 10 minutes and the doctor is advising more rest while quietly making out his bill. Welcome to the less glamorous side of Victorian illness, where dignity is optional and bowel control is purely aspirational. Forget the pale poetry of tuberculosis. This is the high-speed, low-comfort, full-contact sport of waterborne disease. If you're lucky, you're only running to the outhouse. If you're unlucky, you're sharing it with the rest of the block, or worse, relying on a chamber pot that's filling up faster than your relatives can empty it out the window. It always begins the same way. An innocent grumble in the belly, dismissed as bad beef or yesterday's pie. Then, faster than you can shout for help, the symptoms hit with a vengeance. Typhoid, cholera, and dysentery are not interested in polite introductions. They are here for a full house-clearing event, and you are the reluctant host. There is no such thing as privacy when you're sick with these. Everyone in the household, and sometimes the neighbors, knows your business in more ways than one. The bathroom situation is frankly tragic. Victorian homes were not built for speed or sanitation. There's one privy. Outside, a brisk walk down a muddy path lined with suspicious puddles and the ghosts of poor life decisions. At night, it's a dangerous trek, made worse by wind, rain, and whatever is lurking under the outhouse floorboards. If you're housebound, the chamber pot becomes your constant companion, a small porcelain bowl with big ambitions. The less said about emptying it, the better. Your relatives, ever helpful, will attempt to keep your spirits up. They offer you weak tea, settling for the digestion, dry toast, and gentle encouragement not to overexert yourself. Meanwhile, you're pale, sweaty, and wondering if the next cough will turn into a sprint. Someone brings you a sprig of lavender to sniff, which does nothing, and a copy of the family Bible for comfort, which does even less. The real comfort is knowing you might break the household record for number of visits to the privy in a single day. The doctor is summoned, mostly for moral support and to remind everyone that, technically, you're still alive. His treatment plan is simple. Drink boiled water, eat nothing, and rest as much as possible. In practice, this means you lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes until the next mad dash. He writes out a bill with one hand and pats your shoulder with the other, assuring the family that nature will take its course. Nature, in this case, is taking it right through you. If things escalate, and they often do, you'll be subject to the Victorian arsenal of remedies. There's opium to slow things down, brandy for strength, and whatever patent medicine is being advertised in this month's newspaper. None of it works, but it does give everyone something to do besides panic. Meanwhile, the house becomes a battleground of desperate hygiene. Sheets are changed, windows are opened, and then quickly shut because of miasma fears. And hands are washed, well, sometimes. You are isolated in your sick room. and the household learns the hard way that water is not always your friend, especially the kind that comes from the public pump, 2 doors down from the communal pig pen. Recovery, if it comes, is slow and fragile. You're left a little lighter, a lot humbler, and possibly with a renewed respect for modern plumbing. The family debates for years about how close we came, while you quietly vow to never eat suspicious meat again. So next time you complain about a 24-hour stomach bug, remember, in the Victorian era, gastrointestinal chaos was a community event, one that no one wanted tickets for, but everyone remembered. And that, more than anything, is why clean water is the greatest invention of all time. Childhood diseases abound, and every sniffle sends the household into panic. Treatments include hot bricks, ice baths, and making your child recite poetry until the fever breaks. To be a Victorian child is to live under constant threat, not just from hungry goats and falling chamber pots, but from the invisible spectre of disease lurking behind every muddy puddle and unwashed hand. Childhood isn't so much a season of joy as it is an obstacle course, and illness is always waiting for you to let your guard down. The moment little Timmy sneezes, the entire household mobilizes like an understaffed fire brigade. Your mother appears, thermometer in hand, ready to diagnose anything from a simple cold to a case of the scarlet. Grandmother arrives with a basket of remedies so potent the dog leaves the room. The cook stops adding salt to the stew and instead devotes her energy to brewing up suspicious herbal teas, every one of them described as fortifying. Victorian medicine doesn't make a distinction between mild and catastrophic. Every cough is tuberculosis, every rash is smallpox, and every flushed cheek means someone's about to write a very dramatic letter to the family doctor. As the afflicted child, you are immediately wrapped in blankets. Then, depending on which adult has the loudest opinion, subjected to either a hot brick at your feet or an ice-cold sponge bath. The logic shifts hourly. Sweat the fever out is replaced with cool the fever down, and repeated as needed, depending on how many bricks and buckets are available. Of course, Victorian adults believe that children must be kept quiet and well-behaved at all times. And nothing encourages stillness quite like illness. You're confined to bed, propped up by pillows that smell faintly of camphor and disappointment, and forbidden to move except to cough or recite your favorite poem. Some parents believe this exercise in poetry is uplifting for the soul and distracting for the body. Others just like the sound of Ode to a Nightingale at 3 a.m. If things get serious, the doctor is summoned, a man who usually smells of mothballs and something stronger, and who considers children both a medical puzzle and a moving target. His remedies are rarely gentle. A dose of castor oil to cleanse the system, a dab of laudanum to quiet your cries, or a hot mustard plaster to draw out the evil. He might recommend raw onion poultices, vinegar foot baths, or, if feeling particularly inspired, a brisk walk in the garden, even if it's raining, snowing, or the garden is currently occupied by a furious goose. While the grown-ups fuss, you have your own ways of coping. You invent fever dream stories about pirate ships and flying horses. You make bargains with invisible fairies. Let me get better and I'll eat all my peas. And you watch anxiously as your favorite toy, now banished to the washing tub for safety, floats sadly among the soap bubbles. Meanwhile, your siblings are kept at a suspicious distance, either as a preventative measure or to avoid having all the children go down at once. The house is full of whispers, warnings, and the muffled clatter of medical instruments. Sheets are boiled, windows are alternately flung open and slammed shut, and everyone waits for the next symptom, the next groan, or, if luck is on your side, the blessed return of appetite. Recovery, when it comes, is met with cautious celebration. Weak tea is sipped, cautious smiles are exchanged, and you're finally allowed to sit up and gaze wistfully at the rain-soaked garden. Your parents breathe a sigh of relief. Your siblings return to bickering, and you mentally promise to avoid puddles, cold breezes, and poetry for at least a week. Because in Victorian times, a child's health is a daily gamble, and every household is just one sneeze away from chaos, drama, and yet another very creative application of hot bricks. If all else fails, there's always prayer. Or you could try Dr. Blenkinsop's patent elixir, guaranteed to cure everything, provided you don't mind a little arsenic and a lot of hope. Once you've exhausted goose fat, leeches, and the careful application of despair, the household faces a crossroads. Turn to the heavens or the nearest bottle. In most Victorian homes, you do both, often at the same time. The vicar is summoned to murmur encouraging words at the bedside, while someone in the kitchen quietly unpacks a collection of miracle tonics purchased from a traveling salesman with suspiciously shiny boots. The prayer routine is solemn but familiar. The entire family gathers around, heads bowed, hands folded, voices raised in heartfelt, if desperate, pleas. You're reminded to repent, to trust in providence, and, if possible, to avoid dying on a Sunday. There are Bible verses for every symptom. Fever, Psalm 23, rash, job, naturally, night sweats, revelations, just to be safe. The room fills with the comforting scent of beeswax candles and the collective anxiety of people who know their only other option involves unregulated chemistry. And that's where the patent medicines come in. The Victorians were absolutely spoiled for choice when it came to cures. Every ailment had its own brightly labelled bottle. Dr. Blenkinsop's elixir, Mrs. Blenkin, Flannery's miracle tonic, Professor Miggin's pulmonary restorative, and old Mother Peg's guaranteed worm destroyer, which, if it didn't kill the worms, would probably scare them into leaving out of caution. Labels promise to invigorate the constitution, restore the spirits, and sometimes just remove the troublesome bits, which could mean anything from a stubborn cough to a lingering sense of unease. No one ever asked what was in these concoctions, and if they did, the answers were delightfully vague. Herbs, vital extracts, a touch of mercury, and secrets from the Orient. In reality, most patent medicines contained a potent mix of alcohol, opium, chloroform, turpentine, and whatever else could be procured in bulk. The upside was a swift sense of relief. The downside, a new set of symptoms, and, if you were lucky, a spiritual experience or two. Children received their own special brews, including teething syrups laced with morphine and cough drops, so strong they'd quiet both the cold and the child for several hours, possibly days. Every family had stories about Uncle Basil, who survived a dozen fevers on nothing but peppermint cordial and patent medicine. Never mind that Uncle Basil hadn't blinked since the Crimean War. As for actual doctors, they tended to look the other way. After all, many had their own formulas to sell, and the lines between licensed physician and enterprising apothecary were as blurry as your vision after 2 doses of Blenkinsops. If you were really lucky, you'd have a neighbor who moonlighted as a medicine woman, offering up homemade concoctions brewed in the garden shed. Just a sip, she'd whisper, and you'll sleep like a baby, one way or another. Still, hope springs eternal. Each new bottle is opened with anticipation. Every prayer is whispered with increasing urgency, and every sip is taken with fingers crossed behind your back. The rituals are half science, half superstition, and all optimism. If the medicine works, everyone credits the bottle. If you miraculously recover after a week of tonic, prayer, and sheer willpower, it's chalked up to divine intervention, plus just enough alcohol to ensure nobody remembers the worst parts. And if you don't recover, at least your passing is eased by the knowledge that you tried everything, from the power of faith to the wonders of Victorian marketing. Because sometimes, in the battle against illness, what matters most is the hope in the bottle, or, failing that, the prayers at your bedside. Either way, you go down believing in miracles, even if they come with a dash of arsenic. Isolating the sick means nailing windows shut, hanging vinegar-soaked rags everywhere, and hoping nobody else notices you're contagious until it's too late. Victorians invented social distancing, just with fewer hand sanitizers. The moment someone in the house develops a fever, sneezes, or worst of all, breaks out in spots, the entire household swings into action with all the subtlety of a Shakespearean tragedy. Quarantine isn't so much a medical response as it is a family project, and everyone's got a part to play. Father boards up the sick room window with an enthusiasm previously reserved for repelling tax collectors. Mother runs through the house with a bucket of vinegar, dabbing every surface as if sourness can stop airborne pestilence. Grandma sits by the fire, loudly reminding everyone that, in her day, they just buried the sick room key for a week and hoped for the best. Victorian quarantine is less about stopping disease and more about creating an obstacle course of superstitions and household chores. The sick room becomes a fortress. The door is kept firmly shut. The windows are nailed down because everyone knows a draft is how evil gets in, and a thick towel is wedged at the bottom of the door to keep bad airs from slipping into the hallway. Siblings are instructed to keep away unless delivering food, water, or a note of encouragement. Don't die, please, I need someone to play with. Outside the door, it's a parade of preventive measures. Bowls of vinegar are strategically placed on every windowsill, supposedly to absorb the miasma. Camphor balls dangle from doorknobs, and no one is allowed to visit without first waving a handkerchief soaked in eau de cologne. The smell in the house shifts from slightly musty to a full-blown assault of sour herbs and despair. Occasionally, someone opens a window in another room, just for balance, then slams it shut the moment a bird chirps. You can't be too careful. Actual medical advice? It's a mixed bag. Local authorities recommend strict separation of the afflicted, but since the entire family usually shares 2 bedrooms and a kitchen, this mostly means rearranging beds and pretending that curtains count as walls. Food is delivered on a tray and left outside the door like a passive-aggressive room service. No one dares collect the dishes until they've been boiled, doused in vinegar, and possibly blessed by the vicar. Communication with the sick room becomes a study in creative distancing. Whispered instructions are delivered through the keyhole. Letters are slipped under the door. And at least one relative always tries to communicate by rapping on the wall with a broom handle. If you're lucky, you'll get an occasional visit from someone masked with a scarf and armed with a stick, just in case you try to share your illness. Meanwhile, the rest of the household carries on, albeit with extra suspicion and a strict no visitors policy. Friends and neighbors drop off baskets of lemons, advice, and, if things look really dire, funeral flowers, just in case. Gossip travels faster than the fever itself. By the time you're out of quarantine, half the street knows which relative sneezed first and exactly how many vinegar rags were deployed. The actual duration of quarantine is as mysterious as its protocols. Some doctors recommend a week, others insist on 40 days, and Grandma suggests as long as it takes to finish the jar of pickled onions. No one really knows, so the entire family just waits, watching for new symptoms and rationing their last bottle of lavender water. And when it's finally over, the windows are flung open, the bedding is burned or boiled, and everyone pretends the house doesn't still smell like a failed salad dressing experiment. Life resumes its usual chaos until the next sneeze, cough, or rumor of illness sends everyone back into lockdown. So, yes, the Victorians mastered social distancing. They just did it with more vinegar and a lot fewer hand wipes. If you survive, you get your own chair back. If you don't, well, at least you'll always have your own room. If things take a turn, the parlor is draped in black, the family gathers, and your most distant cousin finally visits. Death is both spectacle and solemnity. Someone's already composing your tombstone poem. The Victorian home springs into funereal action the instant the prognosis becomes grave. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn closed at all hours, even if it's midday, and the only people who can see in are the neighbors' chickens. Clocks are draped with black crepe, so time itself is forced to show some respect. All mirrors are covered, because everyone knows a mirror might trap the departing soul, or worse, reflect the horror of your current hairstyle. Furniture is pushed aside, not just to make room for grieving relatives, but for the actual deathbed, a stately, intimidating piece of furniture that's suddenly the main stage for the final act. The deathbed itself becomes a hive of activity. Family, both immediate and obscure, gather to pay their respects, exchange rumors, and see who cries first. Your aunt arrives with the good handkerchiefs. Your uncle brings his most somber hat. There's always one cousin who treats the occasion like a networking event, sidling from mourner to mourner with the subtlety of a tax collector. Someone produces a notebook to jot down your final words, even if you're just asking for more broth. If you so much as mumble in your sleep, it's promptly interpreted as profound wisdom, or, at the very least, a warning for the local parish. Solemnity is the order of the day, but the spectacle is real. The local doctor is summoned, not so much for treatment, but to officiate the transition from ill to departed. He checks your pulse, shakes his head gravely, and offers sage advice like, "Make your peace, or don't forget to pay your tab." The family then huddles in a corner, whispering about which side of the family inherited the weak lungs or melancholy disposition. The air is thick with the scent of lilies, camphor, and tension. Meanwhile, the household maid and any available neighbors start preparing the morning attire. Victorians take black clothing very seriously. There are rules about which fabrics to wear and how long to wear them, weeks for close relatives, months if you want to be seen as truly devastated. Even the family cat looks embarrassed by the new black ribbons around its neck. Outside, word spreads with the efficiency of a modern meme. Friends, acquaintances, and anyone with a distant connection to the household drop by with casseroles, somber cakes, and unsolicited opinions on your soul's destination. The parlor is quickly transformed into a low-budget waiting room for the afterlife. Everyone takes turns reminiscing about the good times, real or imagined, and someone always shares an anecdote involving a mysterious omen or a particularly meaningful cloud. Death, in Victorian England, is not just an event. It's a performance. The priest is called for last rites, the family gathers for a group prayer, and everyone hopes you have something suitably poetic to say with your last breath. The room is quiet, except for the ticking clock, the occasional stifled sob, and the faint scratching of someone rhyming beloved with dove. If you manage to rally for a final monologue, congratulations. Your words will be repeated for decades, embroidered on pillows and misquoted at family dinners. If not, your departure will be marked by solemn nods, elaborate sighs, and at least one relative quietly eyeing your silver hairbrush. As the final moment approaches, someone throws open a window, just a crack, to let your soul escape, or possibly just to let in some air after all those lilies. When it's all over, the household falls into a hush, the parlor becomes a memorial, and the cat claims your favorite chair. Because in the Victorian world, even death was an event, equal parts sorrow, poetry, and just a hint of morbid one-upmanship. And if you didn't get a good deathbed scene, you could always haunt the parlor and make sure the next one is better. You didn't just die. You launched a season of mourning so elaborate, it makes wedding planning look simple. Expect veils, black crepe, and a banquet of sadness that goes on for months. In the Victorian era, funerals are less a private farewell and more a competitive social event. The moment a death is announced, the house transforms from sickroom to stage. Black ribbons are tied to every doorknob, and the local draper makes his seasonal profit supplying endless yards of crepe fabric, enough to turn even the sunniest home into something resembling a haunted ship. Mourning attire is unpacked from mothballs. Every relative in a 50-mile radius dons their most somber hat, and the hat shop across town does brisk business in appropriate bonnets. First order of business, the official notice. Someone is dispatched to deliver handwritten cards to friends, distant relatives, and anyone whose opinion matters. Not receiving a mourning card is a slight worthy of its own feud. Flowers are ordered by the cartful, with lilies and rosemary leading the way, mostly to disguise the less poetic realities of Victorian embalming. A photographer is summoned to take one last family portrait with the dearly departed post-mortem photography, as it's known, where everyone must hold perfectly still for minutes on end, living and dead alike. The funeral procession itself is a parade of gloom, led by the black-plumed horses pulling an elaborate hearse, no expense spared. Mourners trail behind, dressed in enough black to make a raven look underdressed, and children are outfitted in miniature mourning suits with matching expressions. Professional mourners, yes, people actually paid to cry for you, are hired to ensure there's never a dry eye, or at least to fill in for less emotional cousins. Church bells toll, the vicar drones, and everyone takes turns shedding tears, or at least looking wistfully at the ceiling. Eulogies are delivered in trembling voices. If you were especially loved, or feared, someone may write a commemorative poem or publish an obituary so flowery it could cause allergies. All eyes are on the grieving family, whose job it is to maintain a delicate balance between stoic suffering and appropriately dramatic collapse. But the performance doesn't end at the graveside. Victorian mourning is a full-time occupation, and there are rules, so many rules. Widows are expected to wear deep mourning for up to 2 years, which means black veils, black gloves, and absolutely no jewelry unless it contains a lock of the deceased's hair. Men get off slightly easier. A black armband and a few well-timed sighs. And you're free to return to society by the next social season. Children must look sad in public, but are allowed to sneak scones at the wake. Speaking of wakes, the post-funeral meal is a solemn buffet. Cold meats, lukewarm tea, and enough seed cake to pave a modest country lane. No one knows whether to eat, cry, or reminisce, so most guests do all three at once. Old family grievances bubble up, and someone always insists on sharing ghost stories about the dearly departed, just in case the new widow was sleeping too well. Even the house itself mourns. Curtains remain drawn, mirrors stay covered, and clocks are left unwound for weeks. Calling cards pile up on the mantelpiece, and the mailman walks a little slower out of respect, or maybe just because he's tired of carrying all those sympathy notes. Eventually, the sadness ebbs into routine. The black crepe is quietly retired, the veils are packed away for next time, and life shuffles back into colour, one grey day at a time. But for months, and sometimes years, grief remains a household guest, popping up in old photographs, empty chairs, and the faint, lingering scent of lilies and loss. Because in Victorian England, grief was not just felt. It was displayed, dissected, and, in the strangest way, celebrated, a social duty as intricate and absurd as any cotillion. Only with more crying and far fewer dance cards, not dying is a mixed blessing. Victorian invalids get special chairs, bell-ringing privileges, and an endless supply of soothing tonics, plus the daily existential dread of being both pitied and ignored. Welcome to the purgatory of Victorian convalescence, where you exist in a curious limbo. Too sick to rejoin polite society, too healthy to qualify for a melodramatic exit. The word invalid itself is a masterpiece of Victorian understatement, hinting at gentle fragility, but usually meaning permanently parked near a window for maximum poetic effect. If you're lucky, you get a seat by the garden, where you can contemplate mortality in the company of sunbeams and the occasional overly ambitious squirrel. Your daily routine becomes a carefully choreographed ballet of inactivity. There is the invalid chair, a sort of proto-recliner that would horrify modern chiropractors, fully equipped with wheels, extra cushions, and the faint odour of camphor. Next to it sits the invalid tray, upon which parade a rotating selection of weak tea, beef tea, and those gelatinous desserts only Victorians could love. Should you need anything, a sip, a book, or the latest local gossip, simply tug the tasseled bell cord and await delivery. You might even get the good spoons if your suffering seems authentic. Attention from the household is both relentless and half-hearted. Family members pass by your door with encouraging platitudes, "Any improvement today?" But their eyes already scan for an escape route. Friends and distant relatives send notes, poems, and the occasional orange, which, after a week, becomes more science experiment than treat. Your nurse or companion is ever present, always ready to administer tonics, which range from actual medicine to whatever was left on the apothecary shelf after the laudanum ran out. Of course, invalids are not expected to do much. Reading is permitted, so long as the content is not too exciting. Needlework is encouraged, though too much concentration is said to cause nervous prostration. Writing letters is allowed, if they're sufficiently dreary. You are a master of sighs and wistful looks, which can be performed while staring out a window or reclining in the aforementioned chair. A true invalid never moves quickly. The most athletic endeavor is shifting the blanket or rearranging the cushions. There are perks, admittedly. You're excused from all unpleasant duties. No church in bad weather, no visits to awkward relatives, no helping with the washing up. You get first pick of the day's news and unlimited hot water bottles. Every so often, a doctor or two will visit and peer at you over their spectacles, murmuring about weak constitutions and the vital importance of rest, by which they mean at least another 3 months of doing absolutely nothing. But there are pitfalls as well. Your social life shrinks to those who are obliged to visit. You become the star of the family's rumor mill. Everyone speculates on your symptoms, your diet, your willpower, and, if you're dramatic enough, your inheritance. You hear everything, of course, through the thin parlor doors. "Did you see how pale she is?" He coughed twice before breakfast. "I think she's getting better, but we mustn't say so aloud." Even your slow recovery is interpreted as either heroic suffering or lingering for attention. Worst of all is the limbo of being both pitied and ignored. You are the household's living warning sign, a reminder of fragility, mortality, and the danger of taking a walk without a scarf. No one quite knows how to talk to you. They either shout as though you're half dead, or avoid conversation for fear you'll mention symptoms over supper. Still, there's a quiet defiance in surviving as an invalid. You become an expert in passive resistance, finding small joys in the endless monotony. A shaft of sunlight, a good letter, the triumph of not finishing your beef tea. And if you do finally make a full recovery, congratulations. You'll be expected to catch up on every chore, errand, and obligation you've missed since the first cough. Because in Victorian England, the greatest perk of the invalid life is getting out of it. One slow, sighing, bell-ringing day at a time. If doctors and nurses can't save you, perhaps the travelling medicine man or a quick séance will. Why not? The neighbour's cat was cured by mesmerism after all. In the Victorian era, where the line between science and salesmanship was thinner than the gruel in a sick room, medical scams flourished like mildew on a damp parlour wall. If the doctor's lancet, the nurse's poultices, and grandma's prayer circles had failed to do the trick, the household was more than ready to try whatever rolled into town, especially if it came with a brass band and a free sample. Enter the travelling medicine man, equal parts showman and shaman. His cart is festooned with banners advertising miraculous cures for everything from baldness to female complaint. He's got a mustache you could hang a hat on and the kind of confidence that can only come from selling bottles of flavoured alcohol as restoratives. His spiel is legendary. He'll regale the gathered crowd with testimonials from distant lands. A wink, and a promise that his snake oil will revive the languid, strengthen the feeble, and bring colour to even the most pallid cheek. And if you're desperate enough, you'll gladly hand over a day's wages for a bottle, a pamphlet, and a little hope. But why stop at snake oil when the options are truly endless? Patent medicines, often brewed in someone's bathtub, promise to cure everything but a broken heart. Ingredients lists are less informative and more fictional, mostly opium, alcohol, mercury, and secret botanical extracts, which is code for whatever wasn't nailed down at the apothecary. Advertisements in every newspaper tout Dr. Goodbody's universal drops and Professor Quiggin's nerve reanimator, illustrated with heroic before and after portraits, both of which look equally suspicious. If your illness is more existential, you might try spiritual healing. Seances and mesmerists are all the rage. Victorian society can't decide whether it believes in the power of science or the power of sitting in a dark room and holding hands with strangers. The family holds a séance for the sick, inviting mediums with glassy eyes and impressive rings. Table rapping, automatic writing, and spirit voices all promise to provide the answers no doctor can. Did the patient's dead uncle recommend laudanum or just more rest? Only the spirit world knows. Mesmerism is another popular fad. The mesmerist, often a slightly theatrical gentleman in a velvet coat, arrives to wave his hands in mysterious circles over the invalid's forehead, occasionally muttering in French for extra authenticity. Sometimes the patient is cured on the spot, which is Victorian for fell asleep and stopped complaining for 10 minutes. Sometimes he just faints, and everyone congratulates themselves on a job well done. If the patient's health doesn't improve, it's not the fault of the method. Clearly, their animal magnetism was lacking to begin with. All of this would be merely comedic if it weren't so common. With genuine cures rare and chronic illness widespread, Victorians were uniquely susceptible to the hope that somewhere, someone had bottled a miracle. The marketplace of medical promises was never-ending. Herbal concoctions, electrotherapy machines, even radium water, yes, radioactive beverages for vigor. Each new cure arrived with testimonials, celebrity endorsements, and at least one neighbor who claimed it cured his rheumatism and his gout, though it did turn his tongue purple. Of course, sometimes these scams were downright dangerous. Mercury pills, arsenic tonics, and lead-based skin creams left lasting marks, sometimes literally, but when the alternative was endless suffering, even the risk of an explosive cure seemed better than no cure at all. In the end, what mattered most was the feeling that you were doing something, anything, to fight back against fate. So next time you roll your eyes at a modern infomercial, spare a thought for the Victorians, willing to try snake oil, seances, and a little animal magnetism, all in the hope that the next miracle cure was just a traveling salesman away. And if it didn't work, at least you got a good story, a purple tongue, and maybe, just maybe, a night off from reciting poetry to your sickbed. Should you somehow survive, congratulations. Now comes convalescence, which means doing nothing while your family debates whether to send you to the seaside or just keep you wrapped in a blanket for the rest of your natural life. Convalescence is a sacred Victorian ritual, a kind of slow-motion victory lap around your sickbed. It's also a social event, because nothing says still alive like being propped up on the best chair, surrounded by relatives with conflicting ideas about your future. Recovery is never a straightforward return to health. It is, instead, a carefully orchestrated performance in which you remain fragile and interesting for as long as possible, with frequent updates for neighbors and distant cousins. Your new job is to look pale but grateful, occasionally sigh, and accept the endless procession of weak teas, gelatinous puddings, and inspirational sermons. The nurse, who is just beginning to regain her sense of humor, arrives every hour with a thermometer and a lecture on rest. You are not to lift a finger. Attempting to read is met with gentle horror, don't strain your eyes. And sneezing will cause a small committee to gather and debate whether you are relapsing or just bored. The family is divided on next steps. The energetic aunt wants you bundled off to the seaside. Everyone knows that sea air cures all ills, especially those that couldn't be cured by mustard plasters and misery. Packing for the coast becomes an exercise in logistics, with lists of shawls, blankets, hats, and 3 different tonics just in case. Meanwhile, your grandmother argues that the bracing wind will carry you off like a dandelion seed, and you're better off staying home, preferably in the parlor, swaddled in 4 layers and watched like a particularly delicate cheese. The doctor weighs in, with all the authority of a man whose main medical qualification is a well-oiled beard. He prescribes moderate exercise, which is interpreted as sit in the garden but don't look at the sun. You are urged to take short walks, accompanied, naturally, by 2 relatives and a hot water bottle in case you encounter a rogue breeze. The local vicar visits to check on your spiritual fortitude, reminding you that recovery is a moral journey and that boredom, like fever, is best endured with patience. For your part, convalescence is mostly an exercise in not going mad from inactivity. The world resumes its frantic pace outside your window. Children shriek, carts rumble, and you are left to contemplate the slow crawl of a sunbeam across the carpet. Friends drop by with encouraging notes and baskets of fruit, while also discreetly peering at you to see if you're still a suitable subject for neighborhood gossip. You become a living legend, a miracle for surviving, though you suspect it had less to do with spiritual strength and more to do with a sturdy constitution and the avoidance of all medical advice involving mercury. As your appetite returns, the household throws small celebrations: a boiled egg, a slice of buttered toast, the first cup of strong tea. There are rules for every step. No sudden movements, no loud noises, and under no circumstances are you to laugh. Someone reads aloud from a book of improving essays, which, depending on your mood, is either deeply soothing or just another symptom to be endured. Eventually, even the most devoted caretakers lose steam. You're allowed to sit by the window unaccompanied, then take a short stroll to the end of the lane, and finally, triumph of triumphs, join the family for supper. The blankets disappear, the nurse retires, and you return, ever so slowly, to normal life. But you will never be quite the same. People will talk about your illness for years, how bravely you suffered, how nearly you succumbed, how miraculous your recovery was. You become a household reference point, proof that endurance and a little seaside air can conquer almost anything, at least until next winter. Because in Victorian times, surviving the sickness was only half the battle. Surviving the convalescence? That, too, required patience, persistence, and a willingness to let everyone else take credit for your hard-earned return to health. After all that, you might want to wash your hands. But is it safe? Will it help? The Victorians argued about it, so you don't have to. Spoiler: it helps. In a time when germs were more rumor than reality, the simple act of scrubbing up was controversial enough to start a dinner-table feud. Some believed that regular bathing would weaken the constitution and strip away your natural defenses, while others held firm that cleanliness was next to godliness, provided you didn't overdo it and tempt fate by looking too healthy. If you were truly daring, you might even use soap. For the average Victorian, hygiene was a choose-your-own-adventure story. At the upper end of the social ladder, wealthy families boasted bathrooms with bathtubs the size of rowboats and porcelain sinks with gold-plated taps. The rest made do with a chipped basin, a ragged towel, and water that had already been used to rinse the dog. The once-a-week bath became a social norm for those who could afford the luxury. The others relied on brisk rub-downs with a damp cloth, heavy doses of lavender, and an optimistic attitude. Hand-washing was, at best, a novelty. The idea that invisible particles might cling to your hands and cause havoc hadn't quite caught on, at least outside a few rebellious hospitals. In medical circles, however, the great cleanliness debate was heating up. Dr. O. Semmelweis and Florence Nightingale were the rebels, advocating for the radical notion that midwives, doctors, and nurses should maybe wash their hands between patients, an idea so ahead of its time that many colleagues responded by accusing them of witchcraft, heresy, or worse, being too European. For patients, this meant that a hospital stay was a roulette wheel. Sometimes you lucked out and got a nurse who believed in hand-washing. Other times, you got one who believed a brisk shake and a prayer was enough. Surgeons, for their part, wore blood-stained aprons with the pride of battle-hardened warriors. A well-seasoned apron was considered a mark of experience, not a warning sign. If you suggested they use clean tools or soap, you'd likely be laughed out of the operating theatre and possibly prescribed laudanum for your trouble. Meanwhile, at home, the average household's approach to cleanliness was equally inconsistent. Laundry day was a heroic undertaking involving cauldrons, lye, and the strong arms of every available servant. Children were scrubbed up for Sunday church and left to fend for themselves the rest of the week. The weekly hair wash was an ordeal involving eggs, vinegar, or whatever potion was trending in the latest ladies' magazine. And when it came to sickroom hygiene, the priorities were simple. Douse everything in vinegar, burn the bedclothes if things got really bad, and hope the local priest had good advice on pest control. Quarantine, as you've learned, was less about medical necessity and more about household management. If someone was contagious, the family went into lockdown mode. Bedding was boiled, floors were scrubbed, and all correspondence was delivered via broom handle or shouted through the keyhole. Households lived in fear of foul air, but seldom connected the dots between unwashed hands and an outbreak of illness. But as the century rolled on, the germ theory of disease started to gain traction, one microscopic breakthrough at a time. By the late Victorian era, soap was no longer just a tool for the vain or the deeply suspicious. It became a household essential. Advertisers launched campaigns touting the wonders of pure, antiseptic soap, and even the most stubborn relatives were eventually convinced that cleanliness might be worth the risk. So, next time you reach for the soap, remember, you're part of a long, hard-fought tradition. The Victorians did the arguing so you could do the scrubbing, and, spoiler alert, history is finally on your side. Just as you're about to give up hope, in comes a new wave of medical science, germ theory, antiseptics, real anesthesia. The age of try not to die slowly gives way to try to live. It's about time. After centuries of bleeding, leeches, vinegar rags, and heroic doses of brandy, something almost miraculous happens. Doctors begin to wash their hands on purpose. The realization dawns that invisible germs, not bad air, not moral weakness, not even your neighbor's haunted privy, are the culprits behind so much suffering. This news is met with a mix of excitement, skepticism, and a few very nervous barbers who have been doubling as surgeons. Suddenly, the medical landscape is changing. Joseph Lister enters the scene, wielding carbolic acid and a grim determination to reduce the odds of surgery doubling as a group funeral. Hospitals adopt antiseptic techniques, and what was once a guaranteed infection is now, occasionally, just a successful operation. Surgeons learn to clean their instruments between patients, sometimes even before lunch. Aprons that once served as a living record of past procedures are finally sent to the wash. Families rejoice as their odds of survival improve by leaps and bounds. Though a few old-timers still miss the drama of the old days, when every cough could spark a week-long household panic. And then there's anesthesia. Gone are the days when surgery meant biting a leather strap and thinking happy thoughts. Enter ether and chloroform, which turn even the most harrowing operation into a slightly confusing nap. For the first time in history, you can have a tooth pulled, a limb set, or an appendix removed without screaming loud enough to startle the neighborhood pigeons. The doctors are thrilled, the patients are relieved, and the medical students are forced to find new hobbies now that surgery is no longer a spectator sport. Meanwhile, the age of the patent medicine huckster is starting to wane, though not without a fight. Laws are passed. Bottles are required to list their ingredients. Suddenly, Dr. and 50 A's. Goodbody's universal elixir is revealed to be mostly gin and optimism. The public, now slightly more skeptical, starts to demand real results. Quacks and spiritualists find their audiences shrinking as science gets its act together. Of course, the shift isn't instant. Grandmothers everywhere still swear by poultices and onions, and some doctors continue to recommend fresh air and sturdy undergarments just to be safe. But slowly, wonderfully, the tide is turning. Vaccines appear on the scene, offering real protection against the worst of childhood diseases. Hospital wards are cleaned, windows opened, and the concept of sterile technique moves from eccentric fad to standard procedure. Even hand washing, once the subject of heated debates and outright scorn, becomes, finally, non-optional. For the first time, you don't just hope to survive illness, you expect it. Recovery becomes routine rather than miraculous. The sick room, once a place of dread, transforms into a temporary inconvenience, and death is no longer a household guest. Life expectancies creep upwards. Children make it past their first birthdays. Mothers survive childbirth, and you can finally look at a hospital and see hope, rather than a last stop before the undertaker. As the Victorian age draws to a close, there's a sense of cautious optimism. Science, it turns out, is the best patent medicine of all, one that doesn't need a brass band or a séance to deliver results. Sure, the journey has been awkward, noisy, and occasionally lethal, but the dawn of modern medicine means that for the first time, getting sick doesn't have to be a family emergency or a neighborhood event. So, here's to clean hands, clean hospitals, and the remarkable invention of not dying quite so often. It only took a few thousand years, but who's counting? When you're too weak to stumble to the privy, it's time for the dreaded bedpan. A shallow, cold metal dish that promises maximum humiliation and minimum spill protection. The only thing more traumatic than using it is the awkward eye contact with whoever has to empty it. Pro tip: pretend you're asleep the whole time. Welcome to the lowest rung on the ladder of Victorian sickroom dignity. The place where pride is traded for convenience, and privacy is just a distant memory. The bedpan is always introduced with a mixture of sympathy and barely contained dread. No one wants to be the one to fetch it, use it, or, heaven forbid, clean it. Yet in the great parade of getting better, the bedpan is a reluctant but essential guest. You know it's coming the moment your nurse, or, more likely, a close relative with the steady hands of a safecracker, pauses at your bedside and sighs. "You'll feel better, dear," she says, in a tone usually reserved for sheep being led to market. She disappears for a moment, and you pray she's forgotten. She hasn't. She returns, brandishing the bedpan like a medal won in a battle no one wants to fight. There is no graceful way to get into position. Pillows are shifted, blankets are bunched, and you are delicately hoisted with all the ceremony of a sack of potatoes. The bedpan, cold as a Scottish morning and equally unforgiving, slides under you with a metallic clank that echoes through the house. Even the wallpaper winces. If you had any illusions left about dignity, this is the moment they finally pack their bags and leave for a long vacation. Your nurse, being Victorian, handles the whole affair with as much stoicism as she can muster. She distracts herself by rearranging your pillows, tidying your nightstand, or making polite conversation about the weather, anything to avoid acknowledging the ongoing drama beneath the covers. You do your best to pretend you're asleep, unconscious, or recently deceased. The less said, the better. But the ordeal isn't over when the bedpan is full. Now comes the delicate process of removal, a slow, nerve-wracking maneuver that demands both strength and a steady hand. The metal edges bite into your skin. The blankets threaten to slide, and you do your best to hold still, praying for a quick and uneventful extraction. If luck is not on your side, disaster strikes. A slosh, a slip, a spill. Suddenly the sick room is a scene of chaos and apologies, and the nurse is off to fetch yet another basin of vinegar. The aftermath is no picnic either. The full bedpan must be carried, arms outstretched, as if handling a sacred relic, through the house to be emptied and scrubbed. The entire household is suddenly and conveniently absent. The task is left to the most junior member of the household staff, or, lacking servants, to the next person who walks through the door without paying attention. The process involves so much rinsing, scrubbing, and muttering that it's a wonder anyone volunteers for the job twice. Meanwhile, you're left alone, marinating in embarrassment and the faint aroma of industrial-strength disinfectant. The nurse returns with fresh linens, a reassuring smile, and just enough false cheer to make you feel like you've accomplished something noble. All done, she chirps, fluffing your pillow and straightening your nightcap, as if you've just completed a successful round of surgery rather than the world's most undignified pit stop. Of course, the bedpan experience becomes household lore. Relatives will share stories for years. Remember the time the bedpan tipped over at Aunt Mildred's? While you smile politely and plot your escape at the next family gathering. And if you're ever well enough to stumble back to the privy unaided, you'll swear a solemn oath never to take that freedom for granted again. In the end, the Victorian bedpan is a humbling equalizer, no matter your status, your wealth, or your stiff upper lip. When illness strikes and dignity flees, you discover the true meaning of rest and recover, and the secret art of pretending to be asleep, no matter what. The air in a Victorian sick room is thick with the scent of boiled onions, camphor-soaked rags, and someone's failed attempt at lavender potpourri. Every surface is covered in dried herbs, mysterious ointments, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will crack a window before the miasma takes human form and escapes. From the moment you fall ill, the olfactory assault begins. The first wave is always medicinal, camphor, eucalyptus, and enough vinegar to season a year's worth of salads. Your pillow is sprinkled with lavender for relaxation, which mostly just battles for dominance against the more aggressive notes of hot mustard plasters. Someone dabs rose water on your temples. Another cousin decides peppermint oil will clear your humors. You begin to wonder if healing is less about medicine and more about surviving an endless game of aromatherapy roulette. If it's winter, things only get more intense. The windows are nailed shut, trapping every last scent inside for maximum effect. Your nurse bustles in every hour, wielding a new concoction, perhaps a steamy onion poultice to draw out infection, or a hot compress soaked in cider vinegar. The effect is less spa day and more bracing encounter with a witch's pantry. When anyone dares to lift the heavy velvet curtains, the trapped fog of odor sickroom billows out like a long-lost relative desperate for freedom. Even the furniture gets involved. Armchairs soak up every spilled tonic and essence, holding onto the bouquet for weeks. Bedclothes are layered with herbal sachets that claim to promote sleep but mainly provoke sneezing fits. Every jug and basin on the washstand contains either a suspiciously murky liquid or the wilted remains of yesterday's failed herbal infusion. The result is a room that smells like a Victorian apothecary after a minor explosion. The poultices themselves are in a league of their own. Bread and milk, onions and mustard, raw potato, and even chewed parsley find their way onto various parts of your body, all in the name of drawing out illness. The aromas blend and mingle with the unique funk of unwashed feet and day-old gruel, creating an atmosphere so dense you could slice it and serve it with the next round of broth. Occasionally, the dog pokes his nose into the sickroom, then immediately retreats in self-defense. Family members do their best to help. Aunt Mildred waves burning rosemary about with the wild-eyed optimism of someone who has read too many pamphlets on the dangers of miasma. Someone else swears by the power of citrus peels, so every surface is littered with the curling rinds of last week's oranges. The kitchen supplies are raided, and you spend your fevered hours trying to identify whether that faint aroma in the air is thyme, dill, or pure desperation. On particularly bad days, the room takes on a sweet, cloying note, usually thanks to someone's heavy-handed application of laudanum or a syrupy elixir from the apothecary. If you're lucky, it just makes you sleepy. If you're unlucky, it combines with the onion vapor and produces a sensory experience that can only be described as historically unforgettable. In all this, opening the window is considered a last resort, something only the bravest suggest, and only after someone faints from sheer olfactory overload. The prevailing wisdom is that fresh air is both a cure and a curse, and the last thing anyone wants is for the miasma to escape and alert the neighbors. By the time you recover, your own sense of smell has gone on strike, and you'll never think of lavender or boiled onions the same way again. Yet there's a strange comfort in the chaos. Every whiff, no matter how pungent, is a reminder that you're being cared for, fussed over, and subjected to a level of domestic science only the Victorians could dream up. Just promise yourself, if you ever get sick again, you'll request a nice, odorless quarantine, or at the very least, a room with a window that actually opens. Victorian medicine had a simple rule. If a treatment didn't burn, sting, or leave a mark, it probably wasn't strong enough. Enter the world of poultices, hot bread, mustard, or mysterious clays applied directly to the skin. Sometimes these worked. Sometimes they just left you with a rash and a story for your next séance. From the moment your fever spikes, the household launches into a frenzy of active remedies. Somewhere in the kitchen, a relative is already boiling bread in milk, grating onions, or rummaging through the pantry for last year's jar of goose fat. The hotter, the better, they say, ignoring your feeble protests as they slap a steaming poultice on your chest and tuck you in like a reluctant lasagna. Mustard plasters are the gold standard of Victorian suffering. They're simple, a thick paste of ground mustard and hot water, smeared generously onto a square of linen and applied directly to your skin. The goal is to draw out the illness, and perhaps a layer or two of epidermis for good measure. If you flinch, squirm, or break out in a violent cough, everyone nods approvingly. That means it's working. The burning sensation is, after all, the body's way of showing gratitude. If mustard seems too gentle, there are always blistering agents. Blistering was considered a perfectly reasonable way to cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. The process is exactly what it sounds like. Applying a caustic plaster, think Spanish fly or cantharides, to the skin until a large, angry blister forms. The resulting sore spot is carefully lanced and bandaged, leaving you with a stinging, weeping wound, plus the certainty that your next ailment will be kept secret for as long as possible. Bread poultices offer a milder, if soggier, approach. Day-old bread is soaked in hot milk or water, mashed into a mush, and slathered onto whatever part of your body needs drawing out. Covered with flannel and changed regularly, it provides warmth, mild relief, and a lingering sense of defeat. The smell alone could frighten off evil spirits, or at least anyone with functioning sinuses. And then there are the mysterious clays, roots, and herbs. Your well-meaning relatives consult almanacs and ancient family recipes, convinced that somewhere in the mud and mortar lies the secret to your recovery. Cold clay is smeared on your temples for migraines. Grated potato is wrapped around your ankles for swelling. Even cabbage leaves, chilled for maximum discomfort, are fastened to your chest with string. Victorian logic. If it came from the earth and feels terrible, it must be doing some good. Occasionally, someone decides you need a counter-irritant. This involves rubbing strong-smelling liniments or spirits of turpentine into your skin to distract you from the original pain. You're left tingling, dazed, and fully convinced that the only thing being drawn out is your will to live. The aftermath of all this is as much social as physical. Your arms, legs, and torso are a patchwork of red blotches, rashes, and faint outlines of leaves and cloth. Relatives gather to inspect the results, declaring the experiment a roaring success, much improved color. Regardless of whether you feel better or simply more tenderized, if you're lucky, the treatments fade in a few days. If you're not, you'll be comparing scars with neighbors at the next village gathering. Every sickroom visitor brings a fresh suggestion. Try hot vinegar compresses. Have you considered raw garlic? I swear by a liniment of nettles and brandy. You learn to recognize that look in their eye, a blend of hope, desperation, and the undeniable Victorian urge to fix you with whatever's close at hand. So, next time you reach for a heating pad or a tube of ointment, spare a thought for your ancestors who endured their illnesses covered in mustard, bread, and burning plasters, because if it hurt, it simply had to be working. And if it didn't, there was always time for another poultice, or a good séance to explain where your eyebrows went. Being sick in Victorian times meant instant access to an exclusive collection of itchy flannel nightgowns, woolen shawls, and dramatic nightcaps with pom-poms that doubled as mood indicators. The sicker you were, the more layers they piled on. Sweating out the fever was the only real exercise you got all week. The sick room may be short on modern medicine, but it never runs out of textiles. Your transformation into an invalid begins with a flannel nightgown. One size fits no one. With a neckline that threatens to strangle and sleeves so voluminous they collect every drop of spilled broth. Itchy and unyielding, this garment is the official uniform of the unwell. If you're lucky, it's been laundered this month. If not, you get the added therapy of wondering exactly how many other convalescents have worn it before you. Next come the shawls. There is no such thing as too many. Your aunt insists on wrapping you in one for warmth, your mother adds another against drafts, and your grandmother emerges from the linen closet with a third, just in case you start to fade. You begin to resemble a particularly mournful layer cake. The effect is less cozy and more claustrophobic, but nobody in the house can resist the Victorian belief that layering is a cure-all. If you do manage to escape your nest of wool, you'll drag half your bedding with you, a sort of portable cocoon that announces your illness to everyone within eyeshot. The real crown jewel of your ensemble is the nightcap. Not just any nightcap, but one with an oversized pom-pom or lacy trim, an accessory so elaborate it deserves its own place in the family portrait. The cap is both practical and performative. It keeps your head at the proper temperature, wards off chills, and conveniently signals your current mood, jaunty angle for improvement, drooping over your eyes for despair, pom-pom trembling for dramatic effect. In the social world of the sick room, a well-chosen nightcap is worth a dozen reassuring words. If your fever spikes, your caregivers double down on the textiles, hot bricks are tucked at your feet, fresh blankets are piled high, and someone inevitably adds a pair of mittens to keep your hands from catching cold. Soon you're sweating through every layer, the human equivalent of a boiled pudding, but attempts to throw off a blanket are met with gasps of horror and urgent reminders that fresh air kills. Meanwhile, your clothing is subject to constant adjustment. Blankets are tucked, shawls are shifted, and collars are buttoned up to your chin for modesty. If the house is particularly traditional, you might be issued a bed jacket, a sort of decorative shrug, meant to keep you warm while preserving your dignity. Unfortunately, dignity is already out the window, along with any hope of comfort. Of course, practicality is always secondary to appearance. Visitors to the sick room are greeted with a vision of Victorian suffering. You, resplendent in wrinkled flannel, artfully draped in plaid, a nightcap askew, clutching a well-worn handkerchief. This is the official look of the convalescent, a visual shorthand for virtue, patience, and the ability to withstand 3 layers of scratchy wool without complaint. As your illness lingers, so do the textiles. Everything must be washed, dried, and returned to your room with impressive speed, lest you be left exposed to the elements, or, worse, to the family's collective disappointment. Your clothing becomes a matter of household debate. Too warm? Too cold? Too redolent of camphor? Every relative has an opinion, and none of them involve just letting you wear something comfortable. When you finally recover, you shed the nightcap, throw off the last shawl, and gingerly peel yourself from the flannel. Freedom never smelled so sweet or so slightly of lavender sachets and mothballs. And from then on, you'll look at your pajama drawer with a deep, unspoken gratitude for cotton, central heating, and the absolute absence of pom-poms. As the last Victorian cough fades into the night, and you lie here in your thoroughly modern bed, hopefully free of leeches, laudanum, and unsolicited advice from bewhiskered doctors, let's take a moment to appreciate just how far we've come. Tonight, you've survived imaginary fevers, braved the indignities of the bedpan, and endured enough patent medicines to open your own questionable apothecary. You've sweated through a mountain of flannel, eaten broth with questionable origins, and stared down the business end of a mustard poultice, all without so much as a single get-well-soon card. But somehow, the Victorians persevered. Through ignorance, stubborn hope, and a breathtaking commitment to mixing brandy with just about anything, they managed to survive, sometimes even thrive. They faced every cold snap, cough, and calamity with a stoic nod, a rattling teacup, and a willingness to try absolutely anything, no matter how absurd. And because they did, we now have the luxury of hospitals that don't double as haunted houses, doctors who wash their hands, and medicines that do more than just help you hallucinate your way through the week. So tonight, as you pull your comforter a little tighter and let your mind drift, maybe send a silent thank you to those stubborn Victorians who endured it all with a stiff upper lip and an even stiffer nightcap. History is proof that people are resilient, resourceful, and a little bit ridiculous. Sleep well, grateful for your clean sheets, safe remedies, and a world where illness usually means a day on the couch, not a front row seat at a live leech demonstration. Good night, and may your dreams be utterly free of camphor and unsolicited potatoes.